a dream of which all animals live together with no human beings to oppress or control them. This pig's name was Old Major, and he lived on a farm. And on this farm, he decided to get all of the animals together and to impress them to take over the farm, to get rid of the farmer, and then the farm would be theirs and they could control it. And so they did this successfully, and Old Major ended up dying. And before he died, he encouraged the other pigs to fulfill his dream and to be able to run this farm without the help of any human beings. So two pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, took over the farm and they took control of it. But instead of actually following through with Old Major's dream, they kind of warped his dream into their own. And it ended up being a place of inequality and a place of oppression and control. If you want to hear more of this story, then I highly recommend that you read the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. This, as you might think, this book would be a children's book, but it's actually not a children's book. It's an analogy or a satire about the Cold War. George Orwell was a journalist and he was a book writer, a novelist, and he tended to write about social injustice. And this was one of the social injustice that he saw in the world was during the Cold War. He saw how the Soviets, how communism was trying to take over the world. And through this book, through the characters in his book, he displayed this by using this story. The pigs on the farm represented the communists. The first leader, Old Major, represented one of the communist leaders, Lenin, who actually died, and then the second leaders who took over represented Stalin. The farmers represented the major leaders of the world during that time. One of my favorite characters in this book is a horse called Boxer, and this horse actually represents the peasants or the farmers, the hardworking people of that time who thought that they could simply work hard, make a living for themselves, and do fine. But as you'll read in the book, Boxer ended up dying because of how hard he worked and because of the pigs who actually pushed him so hard that he ended up dying. And this happened to many people during the time of communism. I would highly recommend you reading this book because it gives a different perspective about history. Sometimes it's hard to read out of a history book and to really be focused on it and to kind of be entertained by, I guess you could say. But if you read this book, you not only get, you can read a novel, but you can also understand a little bit more about how this time was and how awful it was. This book was published in England on August 17, 1945, so it was published a while back. I would, however, not suggest that you read all books written by George Orwell. There's a book called 1984 that he wrote, which is kind of, I guess in his own way, a prophetic book about what might happen during that time. And I wouldn't suggest that you read that book because it doesn't really have correct information in it. But I do recommend this book if you want to learn more and to understand more about communism and the Soviet